In this video, I'll teach you the basic tricks I use to ensure that I stay organized and study effectively. Make sure you stay until the end to learn the one key way I was ruining my productivity. The first tip is to deal with it now and never trust your memory. You get so much stuff thrown at you. I would literally go into class and they would tell us to do this stuff. They would give us advice on what to study and what to not study. And then after that, you would be walking around and you'd suddenly remember that you'd have to buy something from the store. So now I would just be getting all this stuff in my brain and it would be bouncing around and I'd have to write it down somewhere. At first I tried to remember all of it, but the stress would pile up so high. I would not be able to keep track of all of it. So what I eventually learned to do is to take a to-do list of everything. So on my phone, I go on a reminder app and I go right to text or email somebody, and that makes sure I stay on top of everything. So then as I'm in class or I remember something popping into my head, I of course write on my reminder app or my notes app, and then if it is something that I can do really quickly, I just get it done on my phone and mark it down. But if it's a larger task that I have to complete, I would go write down at the end of the day on Google Calendar eventually what I would have to do to finish that task, or I would plan out a specific time and a reminder on Google Calendar to make sure that I get that task done. So that's the basic thing I do to make sure that everything is completely organized and nothing is bouncing around in my mind and stressing me out. Once I transfer some of my bigger reminders to my phone and I then transfer those to Google Calendar, what I also like to do every night is to plan out how my day is going to look the next day. So I time block some of the different tasks that I have to do. If I have a lot of small tasks that I have to do, such as running an errand, dropping off a piece of mail, or calling my parents, for example, then I would make sure to just block that out in a certain 15 or 30-minute chunk of time on Google Calendar. Then it just makes sure that everything gets done and I'm not overwhelmed with all of the small tasks I have to do. And then it just makes sure I'm ahead of everything that I have to do for the day. Also, these small little things act as little wins that can start your day off in a good way. They also act as a little break. So if I want to take a break from studying, I go and take a walk and go buy something if I need to buy it. When I put these to-dos down on my Google Calendar, if they're bigger tasks, I make sure that I set a realistic schedule, because a lot of the time we overestimate how efficient we are and productive we are. I find it a good day if I finish 60 to 70% of what I actually blocked from my calendar. I know people talk about very efficient people who can do everything on their calendar within 5 minutes. That is not possible for me. I like to fully go and spend like an hour, for example, blocking out studying, or I like to put half an hour for doing these tasks, or half an hour to an hour for a meal, for example. But then at the end of the day, when I block out my schedule for the next day, if I didn't do something important, I make sure to block it out for the next day, or I schedule an effective time for it. And depending on how urgent it is, I do it first thing in the morning to make sure it gets over with. Also, if something takes less than 2 minutes, I make it a habit to do it immediately. If, for example, I have to fill up my water bottle or I have to throw out some stuff on my desk, I just get it done, because otherwise my desk would look like a mess and all this stuff would eventually pile up. It's the little things that can pile up in my life and just make them so much more chaotic than they have to be. So I make sure to stay on top of that, and that just makes sure that everything is clean. If it's a 1-second email I have to just read and skim through, I also archive it in Gmail so I don't have to deal with it ever again. But if it's something I have to respond to later, I can snooze the email, for example, which goes back to reminding myself how to do the daily tasks on my reminder app or my notes app on my phone. The second tip that I follow is to destroy procrastination. I just moved in a few days ago to my dorm in college, but my laptop literally stopped working. The power button literally will not turn on. This was like 2 days before I moved in. So I had to go and buy a new laptop the day before I was moving in. I usually research for at least a few days if making a purchase that big, but I literally was on such a tight time constraint. The point is, if I put that off, I'll be able to study because I could barely turn my laptop on. It's so important to take priority on stuff that's important in your life. So in terms of beating procrastination, for major projects, I like to keep track of my own progress. For example, if I'm writing an essay, on Google Calendar, I schedule, this is the day I'm doing a thesis, this is the day I'm doing an outline, this is the day I'm doing the rough draft, and this is the day for editing and submitting. And I also make sure that the large project is broken down into as much smaller and more manageable chunks, because writing a thesis or coming up with an idea, it's hard in itself, but it's not overwhelming. But writing a whole essay or paper the week before it's due can get really frustrating when you have no plan for it. I make sure to take the time to plan it out. Especially if I get a big task, I find it so helpful to just start it the day it was assigned. For example, a paper, I would try to come up with a thesis and talk to the professor about my thesis the day it's assigned, so I get a role on the assignment. For exams, not necessarily studying the day the exam is announced, because all the exams are announced on the syllabus the day you go into class, but just putting all those dates in the calendar the first day I go to class class, and then setting up a start date for studying, which is ideally 2 weeks before the exam. But a lot of the times it's easier said than done. But besides keeping track of my own progress on Google Calendar and just keeping myself accountable, I also strongly recommend eating healthy. I literally do not keep snacks in my dorm room because I know that I'm just gonna eat all of it, and I find that eating meals is so much easier to schedule on your time, and it leads to less procrastination. I rarely eat snacks. I usually just go for a meal, but if I ever do, I try to make sure it's something a little healthier. I got to this point where I literally can't eat junk food anymore because my body feels terrible after. I don't know if I'm just becoming old. It's gotten to a point where I enjoy eating healthy in a sense. Even though I get that rush when I eat something unhealthy, I just feel terrible afterwards, so I stop myself from eating to procrastinate doing an assignment. Also, if there's a huge assignment I have to do, I make it a big event. I walk so far away from my dorm. I would literally walk across the campus and listen to music as I walk there to sort of hype myself up to do the assignment and get it started. And then it made it more fun in a sense to start that assignment that has made me feel uncomfortable or I didn't want to do. Also, I try to make work routines so I can make steady progress on certain classes and assignments. I try to block out time on Google Calendar that repeats itself, so it's a recurring event that I study for this class or I do work for this class. It depends on the workload of the class, of course. So for my organic chemistry class, I would block out an hour after this period to study or do work for that class. But it's easier said than done, and I prioritize the stuff that's coming up, of course. But if there's nothing better to do, then I try to study, and if there is nothing to study, then I just give myself that time off. Just establishing that routine though, especially a morning routine or a night routine, makes studying a habit, and it just makes it so much easier to get going because I automatically have ingrained in my brain that this is the time to do this and this is the time to do that. Motivation, I find, is so limited. You only get it every once in a while. I can't trust motivation to push me forward. So that routine really keeps me in check, and it keeps me going without motivation as the driving factor. Also, I'm such a big proponent of choosing hard days in advance in the week to get my most challenging assignment done. So if I have an essay to write, or I have this big assignment or problem set I have to work on, I set a time earlier in the week to get that done and get it over with. I schedule my classes so that earlier in the week there's more of the labs, more of the sections that I have to take, and then the rest of the week is much more chill and relaxed. If I have something every day, I cannot handle that. I'm just going to burn out at that point. If I know Tuesday is going to be my more difficult day, I know it's going to be difficult, but at least I'm prepared knowing that, and I'm not surprised by me having to do a huge assignment the night before it's due. But of course there's a balance. I don't really like to have my labs or my conference sections on Monday, then the classes give something that's due whenever your conference section is. And then I usually would have to get it done Sunday to get it done Monday, which I did one semester. I like Tuesday and Wednesday as the harder days, and then Thursday and Friday are more relaxed, and I get to relax and get ahead on other work if I have the time to. My third tip is to build a schedule and stick with it. The key way I was messing up my studying and then my productivity was studying late into the night. I would sometimes study after midnight to try to get ahead of an assignment or get it done, but it just wasn't effective. If I studied late into the night, then I would just wake up and then I would take a nap at midday, and then my sleep schedule would be completely ruined. So now I try to fit as much work as possible into the morning and afternoon. If I have a class with an hour or two gap between the next class, then I'll also set a time to study there, making that a routine as going back to the previous tip, just to make sure that the more difficult work gets done earlier on in the day. So I don't recommend studying late into the night. I recommend getting your 8 to 9 hours of sleep and doing your harder work in the beginning of the day. And when I do study, I make sure to study in isolated locations. So when I mentioned before about making a big project, a big event, and walking all the way across campus, there's so many libraries I can go to study and so many buildings I can find that are isolated from where everybody else is. I don't like studying in my dorm, so I go to random places that are disconnected and isolated from a lot of people so I can focus on the task I'm doing. Also, when I study, I like to take a break every hour. I think 15 minutes on, 10 minutes off is a great distribution for studying. But I know other people work in 90-minute chunks and then take a 30-minute break. So whatever works is whatever works. But having a schedule like that is most effective for me. If you want more college advice, make sure to check out my video about the truth on college success. Thanks for watching. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.